welcome. Today we're looking into the story of John F. Kennedy. I mean, his name, his face, they still feel very present, don't they?
They really do, and we're not just trying to, list facts.
Right. More about what shaped him.
Exactly. What shaped him, his leadership, and the impact he had. Then and, well, now.
Trying to understand the person behind that icon.
That's the goal. We've looked at his background, his presidency, trying to piece it all together.
Okay, so let's start with him taking office. 1961. That transition felt significant.
Oh, definitely. It was striking. You had Kennedy, just 43, so much younger, visibly more energetic than Eisenhower leaving office.
Yeah.
People actually said it was like watching things go from black and white to color. That's the kind of visual jolt it was.
Wow. And Kennedy himself, he leaned into that new beginning idea, right?
He absolutely did. He talked constantly about the torch being passed.
To a new generation.
Yeah, his generation. Born in the 20th century, veterans of the war, shaped by hard times, but committed, as he put it, to human rights globally. This idea of a new life for America was central to his appeal.
And it wasn't just rhetoric later on. Even before the presidency, his views seemed, well, quite progressive for the time.
That's true. Thinking back to his time in the Senate, he took some bold stands, like supporting Algerian revolutionaries against the French.
Against France, a major ally.
Right. His argument was, look, colonialism is ending. We need to build trust with future allies. He even told Congress they need to vote for the future, focus on human rights. That was a big statement then.
And looming over all this constantly was the Cold War.
Always. The backdrop to everything. Remember Sputnik, the Soviets getting into space first.
Huge deal. Made America feel behind.
Kennedy used that. He painted a picture of a stagnant America that needed to wake up, catch up. Advocated for alliances with third world countries, treating them as partners, not just, pawns.
And his main promise regarding the Cold War itself.
To try and lower the temperature. Move away from the really rigid confrontational stances. Find ways to reduce tension.
Okay, now, to really get Kennedy, you absolutely have to talk about his family.
Oh, unquestionably. The Kennedys. I mean, one of the wealthiest families in America.
Irish Catholic roots.
Yes, rising from fairly humble beginnings in Boston. His grandfather was mayor. And his father, Joseph P. Kennedy, Kennedy the Great, they sometimes called him.
Made a fortune.
An incredible fortune. Business, investments, real estate, stocks. We're talking billions in today's money. And fiercely ambitious himself, politically too.
It wasn't just the wealth, though. It was a huge family, right? And politics was a family business, almost.
10 kids. Rich, powerful, deeply, deeply involved in politics. Someone famously called them the closest thing America had to royalty.
Gives you a sense of their status.
It really does. Their power, their influence.
And in JFK's own early life, born 1917, a pretty pivotal year.
Very. World War I raging, the Russian Revolution. He actually had some health issues early on, scarlet fever, other things.
But a happy childhood overall.
Seems so, yeah. But his father, Joe Sr., had incredibly high expectations. Though initially, a lot of that political ambition was focused on the older brother, Joe Jr.
Ah, right. The older brother dynamic.
Yeah, Jack, as they called JFK, was 2 years younger. Joe Jr. was seen as the more serious one, the natural successor, maybe. Jack was apparently more into fun, games.
But the house was still full of political discussion.
Constantly. That was the environment.
Right.
Political talk was dinner table conversation. All the children were encouraged to have opinions, to debate.
And Jack developed this intellectual side early on, too. Reading history, thinking about big ideas.
Definitely. He was apparently quite a reader, especially European history. Thinking about war, peace. He traveled in Europe even before his father became ambassador to the UK.
And then lived there with him.
Yes, stayed with him later. So he saw the rise of Hitler, the tensions building, the annexation of Czechoslovakia firsthand.
Which led directly to his first book, didn't it? Why England Slept.
It did. He was there, researching for his Harvard thesis, actually, watching Britain's response, or lack thereof, to Nazi Germany. The book analyzes why Britain was so unprepared.
Quite something for a young man. Showed he wasn't afraid to voice his analysis.
Absolutely. Shaped his thinking, and showed he was willing to put his ideas out there publicly.
Then came World War II. A really defining experience for him, it seems.
Hugely defining. Despite those earlier health issues, he pushed to serve. Navy. In the Pacific.
And the PT-109 incident, that's legendary.
It really is. His patrol boat gets rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer near the Solomon Islands. He displayed incredible leadership.
How so?
Took command immediately. Rescued a badly injured crewman, towed him for miles swimming, kept the survivors together on a remote island. eventually swam out again to flag down help.
And the message on the coconut shell?
Yeah, that famous detail. He got a message carved on a coconut to native islanders who helped get them rescued. The whole episode just highlighted his bravery, his coolness under pressure, his self-confidence.
And did that experience, seeing war up close, change his views on using military force?
It seems likely. Many argue that his wartime service made him, perhaps, less optimistic about military solutions being the answer to complex political problems.
Interesting. A kind of caution learned firsthand.
Possibly. Something that might have stuck with him later.
So after the war, this young hero decides to go into politics. How did that start?
Well, it was a mix. His own drive, certainly. He worked hard. But also, let's be frank, his father's money and connections were absolutely crucial.
Right. That Kennedy machine.
Exactly. He had health issues still, sometimes spoke very rapidly, but he was a relentless campaigner. Started early, worked tirelessly, went door to door, really connected with people that way.
But his initial time in Congress wasn't like setting the world on fire.
Not really. He won his election, sure, House, then Senate. But he wasn't seen initially as a major legislative force or a particularly brilliant congressman.
When did his national profile start to rise?
He made a bit of a splash during the Democratic Convention in '56, the one where Stevenson ran against Eisenhower again. He made a run for the vice presidential nomination. Didn't get it, but it put him on the map nationally.
And around this time, his personal life becomes more public, too. His marriage to Jacqueline Bouvier.
Yes, married while his political career was taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And the press image was carefully cultivated.
The perfect couple.
That was the image. Young, attractive, wealthy, successful. The sort of American dream personified.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, behind the scenes.
The affairs.
Yes. It's pretty well established now. He had numerous extramarital affairs before and during the marriage. Similar pattern to his father, actually.
Okay.
Became much more public knowledge after he died.
And that brings up the J. Edgar Hoover connection, the FBI director.
Ah, Hoover. A fascinating and, frankly, quite sinister figure in some ways. Head of the FBI for nearly 50 years. Extremely powerful.
And he had dirt on Kennedy.
That's the widespread belief, yes. That Hoover had compromising information, likely about the affairs, maybe other things, and used it as leverage to keep his job and maintain his influence during Kennedy's presidency. A very complex, murky relationship there.
Okay, turning to his presidency, a major early challenge almost right away, the Bay of Pigs.
Yes, April 1961. A huge disaster. This plan, inherited from the Eisenhower administration to train Cuban exiles and support their invasion to overthrow Castro.
And it failed spectacularly.
Utterly. Poor planning, inadequate air support, underestimated Castro's forces. It was a complete humiliation for the new administration.
How did Kennedy handle the fallout?
Publicly, he took full responsibility, which gained him some respect, actually. But privately, it reportedly made him very wary of the advice he was getting, especially from the CIA and the military old guard.
And led him to rely more on his brother.
Yes, Robert Kennedy became much more central, his closest advisor after that.
And then, just a few months later, another crisis flares up. Berlin.
Right, the Berlin Wall, August '61. Khrushchev and the Soviets wanted to stop the flood of East Germans escaping to the west through Berlin.
So they just built a wall.
Essentially, yes. Divided the city overnight. Kennedy had met Khrushchev in Vienna earlier that year, a tense meeting, didn't resolve anything. The wall went up. Kennedy had to react, uphold West Berlin's freedom, but avoid escalating things into a war. A very tricky balancing act.
And throughout all this, the Kennedy family itself was very involved in image making, weren't they? Especially Jacqueline.
Oh, absolutely. Jackie Kennedy played a massive role. Her restoration of the White House, making it a showcase of American history and art.
The televised tour, that was huge, wasn't it?
Immensely popular. It made her an icon, a symbol of glamour, culture, change. She became a global celebrity, which definitely helped the administration's image.
Kennedy also had these connections with Hollywood celebrities. That drew attention, too.
It did. Most famously, Marilyn Monroe.
The Happy Birthday, Mr. President performance.
Iconic, yes. But the rumored affair behind it caused enormous problems. Reports of threats of divorce from Jackie, major political risks. That relationship apparently ended.
But not others.
Reports suggest his affairs continued with other women, some raising potential security questions, linking back to that Hoover situation, perhaps. It's a complicated part of his personal life.
Then came perhaps the defining moment of his presidency, and maybe the whole Cold War era, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
October 1962. 13 days that genuinely felt like the world was on the brink of nuclear annihilation. The Soviets secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba.
Capable of hitting the U.S.
Yes, major U.S. cities. The pressure on Kennedy to launch an immediate military strike, invade Cuba, was immense.
That he didn't.
He didn't. Drawing maybe on that Bay of Pigs experience, that caution about military advice, he resisted the immediate calls for attack. He opted for a naval blockade, which they called a quarantine, and intense secret negotiations.
And it worked.
It worked. After incredibly tense days, Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles. In return, the U.S. publicly pledged not to invade Cuba and secretly agreed to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey later on. It's considered the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. His handling of it is often seen as his finest hour.
Alongside the Cold War, the other massive issue defining the era was the civil rights movement.
Absolutely crucial. The struggle for racial equality was reaching a boiling point. Sit-ins, freedom rides, protests against segregation. It was impossible to ignore.
How did Kennedy initially respond?
He was sympathetic personally, but initially cautious politically. He needed the support of Southern Democrats.
But events forced his hand.
Increasingly violent resistance to desegregation, particularly in the South, forced the issue. He sent federal marshals, then troops, to enforce court orders, like integrating Ole Miss.
And the confrontation at the University of Alabama?
That was pivotal. Governor George Wallace blocking black students. It led Kennedy to go on national television.
And deliver that powerful speech.
Yes, framing civil rights not just as a legal issue, but as a fundamental moral issue for the country. He called segregation a moral crisis and called for sweeping federal civil rights legislation.
A major turning point.
A huge step. He didn't live to see the Civil Rights Act pass, that was Johnson, but Kennedy put the full weight of the presidency behind it in a way that hadn't happened before.
It's also interesting, though, maybe less central, to touch on his dealings with other regions, like Iran.
Right. It wasn't top of the agenda like Cuba or Berlin, but he was paying attention. He knew Ali Amini, the Iranian ambassador, quite well.
And saw a need for reform in Iran.
He did. He and Amini worried about the Shah's resistance to reforms, fearing it could lead to instability, maybe even a communist takeover. Kennedy actually supported Amini becoming prime minister to push through things like land reform.
But the Shah wasn't keen.
The Shah was wary of Amini's independent power base, his direct line to Washington. Eventually, the Shah outmaneuvered Amini, replaced him, and then launched his own program of reforms, the White Revolution. It shows the tricky dynamics, the U.S. trying to influence allies, the local leaders having their own agendas.
And then, tragically, unexpectedly, it all ended. Dallas, November 1963.
Yes. Assassinated after less than 3 years in office. Shot while riding in his motorcade in Dallas, Texas.
The circumstances are still debated so fiercely.
Endlessly. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, identified as the shooter. He himself was then shot dead just days later. The official Warren Commission concluded Oswald acted alone.
But so many people don't buy that.
No. Theories have swirled ever since, involving Cuba, anti-Castro Cubans, the mafia, even rogue elements within the U.S. government, the CIA perhaps. Conflicting evidence, questions about the investigation, documents still classified. It fuels the speculation. The assassination remains this huge, unresolved trauma in American history.
So looking back, John F. Kennedy, he's still such a figure of fascination, isn't he, decades later?
Absolutely. His time in office was so brief, really, but packed with these incredibly high-stakes moments. Major achievements, but also those lingering questions.
We've talked about this leader who seemed to promise so much, embodying that new generation, navigating the Cold War's dangers, confronting the moral challenge of civil rights.
He really did. But his legacy is, well, it's complicated, full of those contradictions we discussed, the image versus the reality sometimes. It's still being debated, re-examined.
His story really makes you think, doesn't it? About leadership, what shapes people, what shapes nations, and just how powerful image and aspiration can be.
It really does. And it leaves you with that question, perhaps. When we look back at figures like Kennedy, how much are we seeing their actual actions and impact? And how much are we seeing the powerful narrative, the myth that grew up around them?